Knowing yourself is the beginning of wisdom. Self-awareness is usually seen as something good. People are told to reflect more, understand themselves, analyze their emotions, become more conscious. And sometimes this genuinely changes people's lives. A person begins recognizing patterns. They understand their fears more clearly. They stop repeating unconscious behaviors. They become more emotionally honest. But there is another side to self-awareness that people rarely talk about. Sometimes people become so self-aware, they stop knowing how to live naturally. The mind begins observing life instead of fully living it. At first, self-awareness feels empowering. A person notices their insecurities, emotional triggers, hidden motivations, unhealthy patterns. And this can lead to real growth. Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Carl Jung believed that much of human life is influenced by unconscious forces. Fears we do not fully recognize, patterns we repeat automatically, emotions we avoid confronting. This is why Jung famously wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." In other words, awareness matters, because people cannot change patterns they cannot see. But modern life did not stop at awareness. It turned awareness into constant self-monitoring. Many people today do not simply experience emotions anymore. They immediately analyze them, interpret them, label them, question them. A conversation happens, and afterward, the mind replays everything. Did I sound awkward? Why did I say that? What does that reaction mean? What does this say about me? Awareness slowly becomes self-surveillance. There is a strange kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly observing yourself. Not only living, but monitoring yourself living. Instead of simply speaking, part of the mind evaluates, how am I being perceived? Instead of fully feeling emotion, another part immediately asks, what does this emotion mean about me? And over time, the self begins splitting in two. One part experiences life, another part watches, analyzes, and corrects the experience continuously. Some people become so self-aware, they no longer know how to simply be. This is one reason many highly introspective people feel emotionally exhausted. Because their minds rarely rest. Even joy becomes analyzed. Even connection becomes observed. Even spontaneity becomes self-conscious. Modern culture constantly encourages people to examine themselves. Social media, therapy culture, self-improvement culture, personality systems, identity discussions. People are continuously reflecting on themselves. And reflection itself is not the problem. The problem begins when a person becomes trapped inside endless self-analysis. South Korean-born German philosopher Byung-Chul Han writes about how modern society creates forms of self-surveillance. People no longer need someone else to constantly monitor them. They begin monitoring themselves automatically. Not only externally, psychologically, people now manage personality, identity, emotions, reactions, self-image almost constantly. The self becomes a project that is never allowed to rest. Human beings were not meant to experience themselves entirely from the outside. Some of the most meaningful moments in life happen when people temporarily forget themselves. When someone is deeply in love, absorbed in music, laughing uncontrollably, creating something meaningful, fully present with another person. They are usually not intensely self-monitoring. They are immersed. But excessive self-awareness creates distance from direct experience. A person no longer disappears naturally into life. They remain partially outside themselves, watching. For many people, constant self-analysis is not really about wisdom. It is about fear. Fear of being inadequate, saying the wrong thing, becoming a bad person, making mistakes, losing control, being misunderstood. So the mind keeps monitoring itself in an attempt to stay safe. But paradoxically, this often creates even more anxiety, because the person never fully relaxes into experience anymore. They become trapped in meta-consciousness, not only feeling emotions, but analyzing themselves feeling emotions. Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote deeply about reflection and despair. He recognized that excessive reflection can disconnect people from direct living. And perhaps this is one of the quiet struggles of modern life. People increasingly understand themselves intellectually, while feeling increasingly disconnected from simply being alive. They know psychological terminology, attachment styles, trauma language, personality frameworks. But knowledge alone does not always create integration. Real self-awareness is not endless self-analysis. It is integration. Healthy awareness should eventually make people calmer, more grounded, more honest, more present, not more fragmented. The goal is not to endlessly dissect every emotion. The goal is to understand yourself deeply enough that life becomes more natural again. Because mature self-awareness eventually becomes quieter. A person no longer needs to constantly monitor themselves. They begin trusting, experience, intuition, emotional honesty, direct presence. The purpose of self-awareness is not to escape life into analysis. It is to return more fully to life itself. Perhaps this is the real paradox of self-awareness. Without awareness, people remain trapped in unconscious patterns. But with too much self-consciousness, people can become trapped inside themselves. And maybe wisdom is not found at either extreme. Not in unconscious living, not in endless self-analysis, but somewhere in between. A place where people understand themselves deeply, without losing the ability to simply live. Some forms of awareness bring people closer to themselves. Others quietly separate them from life.